This talk is basically kind of how I stumbled into the game industry. I actually, you'll hear a little more, and those are just some of the crazy titles I've worked with, including my Citizen Kane moment with Return to Zork. I don't think I've done anything. I was a technical director, but I did the game engine and I did the UI, so I don't think there's anything I've done that's better than that. How did I get started in the game industry? Okay, so first of all, pre-game industry, I was basically going to be an astrophysicist. But I got into University of Pennsylvania, another similarity between me and Lee, because I had published my own paper in high school. And so I applied to Penn as an English major, journalism major, because my verbal SATs were better than my math SATs, which is actually pretty much true. And I switched into physics at Penn. I got in as a journalism major, and the only thing I would tell you that's interesting about that is that the first assignment only was there for one class. The first assignment was a paper about how Rupert Murdoch's acquisition of newspapers is going to change journalism forever. And it did, obviously, in not a good way. Okay, so let's go through this. What I was planning to do is become a physicist. And in 1978, I actually worked on that experiment that was based on it. And so when people post things on Facebook like, what's the craziest thing you've ever done that no one will believe, I say, I spent a summer about a mile underneath the ground of the planet. So that was that. So here I am, a physics major. What were my influences? I can't really see, but that's a lunar lander Atari. And what's funny is the next picture is 2001, the docking sequence. I really thought that was computer graphics. It was not computer graphics. It was all animated because computers in the 60s couldn't do that. At least these computers couldn't do that. So that was my influence. And then a lucky break happened. I was in my senior year at Penn. The kid who had the TV typewriter said to me, Bill, we don't have enough people for a class of microcomputers. Can you join the class so we can actually have this class? So I took it, and of course the project I did was a lunar lander game on Kromenko color graphics board. And the Moore College of Engineering is known for ENIAC, the first electronic computer. And then the accident happened. I'm in grad school. By then I was at University of Maryland for a year doing graduate physics. Managed to get through Jackson. If you know graduate physics, Jackson's Electrodynamics is the book that basically kicks you out of grad school. But I got through it. But I needed a job during December, so I took a job. So I took a job playtesting. And that was at a local company called Avalon Hill. They were in Baltimore. So I started testing games at Avalon Hill in December of 1979. Yeah, I know I look good for my age. What can I say? No, I don't. But anyway, the point was it's now a subsidiary of Hasbro. I tested games. What did I test? Well, I tested Nuke War and B-1 Nuclear Bomber, which were basically mainframe games that were written in BASIC that Avalon Hill published. Legionnaire, on the other hand, was done by the magnificent Chris Crawford. It was an Atari 800 only title that ran in real time. It was a real-time war game. It didn't stop action. It was brilliant. And then Lords of Carmel was a really good text adventure that has some sort of randomness to it and also came with a beautiful book to prevent piracy. So I'm at Avalon Hill, and I'm looking at these Nuke War and B-1 Bomber and other games, and I say, I think I can do better, guys. And they say, okay, you do better. So I came up with this idea of doing a game based on an animated series called Star Blazers, or known as Spaceship Yamamoto. And the game I came up with was basically, let's do a game sort of like Star Trek, the original Star Trek that I had played at Penn on the chiclet keyboard Commodore PET. I wanted to do that game, and I came up with this idea. Now, this game was a little bit too much for the computers at the time, but it worked. You had up to 10 ships under your command. You set the scenario up. You had 20 enemy ships. And I was already taking an AI class in graduate school. I was already interested in that. And so the idea I had was, the enemy ships will go to the nearest object, but we'll weight that algorithm by what you do. So it had bases, it had planets, you refuel, blah, blah, blah. But it's basically Star Trek reimagined, the Star Trek game originally. Now the Apple II version looks like hell, right? It looks like low-res graphics. Well, another Avalon Hill story. I actually paid an artist to sketch beautiful line drawings, and I used Apple shape tables, if you know what that is, to do it. But Avalon Hill wanted the game to fit in a 16K. And Avalon Hill shipped this game on a single tape with all the versions on it. It was brilliant in a way because it cut their packaging. And the thing about Avalon Hill that people don't realize, they're a board game company mainly, was that they were vertically integrated. They owned Monarch Printing, so they could create incredibly good boxes and all that. And that's interesting because when we started selling games, the computer stores didn't want to carry them because everything back then was in plastic Ziploc bags that would hung on pegs, and they were mad at us for doing boxes, but we did boxes. So, now I can calm down a little. The next game was, let's build I didn't know what a first-person shooter was, but I wanted to build a real-time game inspired by Alien, where you would run around this ship firing at things and stuff. And I had an algorithm I'd sort of uncovered that allowed me to randomly generate the entire layout. And this was a decent game, mostly basic, with some exceptions. Basically, it had some cool features. The map only showed you what you had seen. It automatically generated the whole game. And I did this for a lot of computers, TRS-80, PET, CoCo, Atari, IBM PC. And actually, decades later, I figured out that someone had ported it to Japan, in Japan machines, FM7 and the PC 8800. Now the PET version, Jim Butterfield, if anyone know who Jim Butterfield was on the PET, he wrote the line drawing routines. I wrote the line drawing routines for the TRS-80. The CoCo version, which had no assembly language, was faster than every other version. CoCo was a very fast machine at drawing vectors. DOS version was done on DOS 1.0, and like I said, the FM7 being done in Japan had much better looking robots than I did. That's a cool looking robot compared to the crap I did. So that's that. Now, I have been both extremely lucky and unlucky in my career. This was a case where I was lucky. I was working at a video store, rental store and computer store. They were selling Atari 800s and the Osborne 1. And the guy there was a person who had been in the Navy and was familiar with air traffic control. And he had written a radar display, sort of. And I decided I could do an air traffic control game for Avalon Hill. And this, by the way, I consider to be the best box art of any game I've ever worked on. This was a magnificent piece of work. Thank you, Avalon Hill. This game, had basically up to 10 aircraft under your control, and you could choose whether they were a piston engine Cessna jet, or a 747. And having the degree in physics, I knew that they could only climb and descend at certain rates, they could only turn at a certain rate. So they all behave properly. The whole idea was to line them up with the runway, and there were two different displays. This is a close range display, and get them all to the ground without getting them too close. You got to keep them separated. Yeah. My wife is really pissed off because I'm flying to GDC in March, and she's scared that I'm going to get into a collision with something. It's possible. I can't take a train. They don't have a really good schedule. But anyways, S is a scale. You can do that. It's all real time. Now, Apple II fans, I can't show the Apple II version because I can't find a screenshot of it. But the Apple II version had two versions, and one of the versions used this trick on the Apple II where you change screen modes during vertical blank. So it went from the Apple high-res graphics to the text graphics every 30th of a second. So it blinked like, and it was like a real effect of like being an overstressed air traffic control and all that, because it blinked. But you didn't have to use that version. You could use this version, just simply drew a vector and then undrew it and kept refreshing the background. It used character graphics for that, but it used the vector graphics for the thing. It used the 320 by 200, that's the Atari 800. And Atari 800 was a computer I bought for about $1,200 in 1981. I should mention that when we did Conflict 2500, which was originally written on the Apple II, and we got the Atari 800, we had no manual. We actually poked memory to figure out how to do things. It was like, a week of like, what is this machine going to do? And then Chris Crawford came to the rescue by writing Day Ray Atari, which was one of the greatest things ever written about it, in terms of a manual. Okay, so here comes the sober part. I made a big mistake in my career right then and there. I was making money on these games, and at the time, pretty good money. I remember I pulled up to grad school with a new 5 Series BMW, and the thing was a freaking lemon. What a piece of shit. Sorry, sorry BMW. And amazingly, the turn signal worked, because I'm convinced that none of the turn signals that BMW ships work. But anyway, they just don't work. But anyway, I could have stayed as an independent game designer, but you had to understand the pressures. The game industry was new. No one knew what it was really going to be like, and my parents were probably wondering, what the hell did they do with my education was expensive then. Now it's just 10 times as much, but it was expensive. Anyway, I could have stayed as it could have been a contender. Also, everyone sort of lied. I remember Bill Budge I always Bill Budge, a guy who was at EA told me that his numbers in terms of sales of the 8-bit games, and it was like, oh my God, I've done almost as well as him. And then I found out that Richard Garriott wrote his initial stuff in BASIC just like I did. I thought I was like crippled because I wasn't writing pure assembly language. So yeah, I mean, we all did that. But I did take a break at the right time. I took a break during the computer crash, and I went to work for Epson's Rising Star on Valdocs. Now, the good thing about this is that it basically taught me everything I need to know about technical management by watching everything you shouldn't do in technical management. There was a time when basically they rented hotel rooms and had people working literally as long as they could stay awake over and over again. And the code never got any better. It was buggy. And finally, I put my foot down, I was a big man back then. I was over 300 pounds. I said, less keyboarding, more whiteboarding. That was written on a big thing. And we managed to get Valdocs 2.0 out, which was pretty good. But the fact that the Valdocs was running on a basically a modified CPM with 4 banks of 64K switching between apps, it was just hard to make it perform. But I wrote probably the most incredible program I ever wrote in terms of size and power. I wrote ValDraw, which was a CAD package in 50 kilobytes of RAM using a language called Forth. I learned Forth. Forth was an interesting language, and Rising Star used Forth for applications and assembly language for the system. There's a guy named Roger Amadon. Does anyone ever hear of Roger Amadon? He came up with TPM, which was a variant of CPM. He was a very brilliant man, and he did a really good job on that. And the QX10 actually had a graphics coprocessor that would draw vectors very, very fast. So I did a CAD package. And this was 50 kilobytes, and it had associative dimensioning. If you change the size of something, the dimensions were recalculated. The dimensions had fractions. It was really advanced. And when I look at the code, because I have the book with the code in it, I can't understand how I did it. I don't know how I did it. I mean, the entire font, which was a stroke font, could rotate, scale, and all that, was 700 and something bytes. Every stroke was a byte. 4 bits of Y, 3 bits of X, 1 bit for pen on. Anyway, I worked there. It taught me a lot. But I couldn't quit games. I had to come back to games. And Rising Star had a Mac 128K, and I figured, I knew some people who wanted to start a company, and we came with this idea of doing a game where you're wandering a pyramid, fighting monsters, real time, and you have to find the treasure at the very bottom. Once again, Indiana Jones inspired. It was shaded and it moved smoothly. It actually moved. When you move forward, it didn't just jerk. It actually moved smoothly. It had everything I had done in Voyager with the algorithmic map, and the actual floor layouts got larger and larger because you started at the top of the pyramid. And you can play this on the Internet Archive. It's an extraordinarily unfair, difficult game because once you get to the final floor, I think it's 5 floors, it just turns up the heat on all the monsters. The nice thing about this, I ran into someone who worked on BioShock, and they told me that the whole thing in BioShock with the monsters surprising you from behind came from Pyramid of Peril. Pyramid of Peril was done in 30 days from concept to heat shrink at First Mac World. It's really a great game. I mean, it just for the fact that it worked. And technically how we did it is this. We were using Mac4. The Mac4 people, a week before the show, said to us, Bill, we're not going to let you have the target compiler to release this game. We don't have time. We're still working on it. You have to find you just can't do that. So I found a 68K Forth that was written in a 16-bit environment, which means that the words were 16 bits, not 32 bits. This turned out to be really good, called Macromedia Forth. And we just simply added all the Apple words. And the way we did it is we used, on the 120K Mac, we used 64K for the code and 64K for the data. It managed to fit on the 128K. And now some of my incredibly bad luck. I did this. Mac Challenger, the first light simulator for the Mac. Oh yeah, oh yeah. This thing was ambitious and cool. I mean, you basically controlled it by grabbing that stick with the mouse. Maybe I should have done it differently. But it had after-action playbacks, so you could, after you crashed or landed, you could watch what you did from chase planes or from the ground cameras. It was cool. It also had an autopilot that would always land it perfectly. And I was lucky that I actually had taken a course at grad school where they talked about autopilots and stuff. So we had 2 autopilots. One that got you line up with the runway, and the other one that did the landing and the flare. And it was based on real shuttle data because I'd been at, I actually went to the first shuttle launch, and like all things tech, They didn't launch that day because the computers went bad. Okay. So so Avalon, so this was Aegis development, and I'm not going to show slides about this, but we went into the Amiga in a big way. And that actually saved my career later on, because one of the things we did at the Amiga is we published a game which you may or may not remember called Ports of Call, which I think was a visionary game where you ran a shipping company and gradually got better ships and shipped things from place to place, and the price of shipping depended on what was going on in those places. It was brilliant. Back to that later. So I end up in '88 going to Activision. Now, the thing I'm most proud of at Activision is not Return to Zork or Rodney's Fun Screen or whatever else I worked on. It's this. The week I came there, Richard Lehrberg, who's a great guy who hired me, had a box on his table, 5 floppies and a Mac blue box. And he goes, I go, what is that? And he goes, it's this children's thing by 2 brothers in Texas called Rand and Robin Miller. It's called The Manhole. So I said, these guys are brilliant, because what they did is they basically gave up the idea of using buttons for navigation. They basically came up with what I call the complete visual interface. There was no buttons in this game. There was no commands. You just simply clicked that something where it made sense. And for almost 2 years, I basically led the effort to get this thing running on machines other than the Macintosh. We built our own development system based on a tiny scheme language, beautiful language. You know, everything was objects. It was small, compact, fast as heck. And we were able to do that. And I quoted the Digital Antiquarian, and that's the MCGA version for PC there. We shipped that on floppies and all that. And then, who was the VC? Stuart Alsop, the VC, said, The Manhole is the first title I've ever seen that makes sense as an optical disc title. Okay, Richard. I mean, whatever. We did this. We released, you know, I had been involved with CDI, you know, at Aegis. And CDI was announced like in '85, '86 at the CD-ROM conference. By the way, the first big Microsoft, we're going to nail these people, was Bill Gates killing CDI. He literally killed CDI. People don't realize that. He killed CDI because in the second CD-ROM conference, he got RCA to do something with their capacitive discharge laser disc player and figure out a system that would play video from regular CDs. And he showed DVI, which never shipped, and he showed a title called Palenque, where they were exploring the Palenque ruins in the Yucatan. And CDI basically decided they were going to solve that problem, and they solved it by '91 with an MPEG card. So anyway, I just wanted to break the logjam of CDI. But let's be fair, CDI literally saved my life, because in '86 when I was at Aegis and we had that big CDI project, they sent me to a doctor for the insurance. They put like a multi-million-dollar policy on me, and they discovered that I had all these problems, and they shipped me off to Pritikin, and I started on the path to like sanity and stopped. I haven't had a hamburger since 1986. I had no choice. There was no statins. I had to do something. Anyway, so I got this title green-lighted, and these guys, they went on to do something called Myst. But this is, you know, I convinced Activision to do the CD-ROM, but Manhole, Activision, i.e. Lacovision, lost Cyan during their Chapter 11 because they basically didn't pay Cyan, and they went off. Now, Bobby Kotick took over Activision. It cost him $500,000. I think he made some money on that. It pays to date Steve Wynn's daughter. That's how it happened. He had dated Steve Wynn's daughter. Steve Wynn knew him. Steve Wynn backed him up. They took over the largest shareholder, sort of. They got the thing out of Chapter 11. Bobby became the chairman of Activision. But at the time he was coming in, I had done a really bad game but a really good person, Steve Moretsky. We did Lever Goddess of Phobos 2. We almost closed in '91 because we lost a judgment in the bar video game patent. By the way, the answer to the question of why did Nintendo ever license anything to CDI, namely Link, is the bar patent. They lost the case too, and their settlement is the real reason why they dropped Sony on the CD-ROM project for the Super Famicom SNES. The story you hear is, oh, they dropped Sony because Sony was too expensive. No, my last meeting in Japan in 1990 was with Sony's CD-ROM PlayStation group when it was an accessory for the Nintendo. They dropped it and also gave Philips the rights to do some Nintendo titles, and may not remember this, Nintendo announced they were going to use CDI as their drive, but once they realized how crazy lame it was, they didn't do that. Anyway, so we did this game called Lever Goddess of Phobos 2. We were in Chapter 11. Mistakes were made. It used, people drew on paper, and that was scanned in. That was good. But the big decision was that the game was too easy. We had free characters, and you could play as any of those free characters. That was a big mistake. One of the lessons I learned from early on in the game industry is you really want to focus on a great design, minimalist design. You don't, throw out the cruft. So the idea of having you choose between the alien, the woman, or the man was a mistake. Plus, the game was too darn easy. Moretzky, who wrote it, he had done Hitchhiker's Guide and a couple of, he was a brilliant guy, and he had great writing, but it was just too easy. But because it was too easy, and we had bad reviews, Computer Gaming World, I think it was. Yeah, there was a guy named Chris Lombardi. If he's here, please don't hit me. He wrote a really bad review of Lever Goddess of Phobos. When we did the next game, we had puzzles named after him in the game. We were so, and also we were unfettered. Bobby was focusing on saving the company. He let us do that. He didn't fire me for Lever Goddesses. Oh, why didn't Bobby fire me in the first place? Is because I had worked on Ports of Call, and his company, which was I think called a disc company, took over Ports of Call when Aegis folded. So he knew who I was, and he also was involved with the Amiga, and we knew each other from the Amiga days. He wrote WordCraft for the Amiga, his company, before he came to Activision. The Bobby I know is not the Bobby he became. I'm not going to go into what I think happened, but he was very nice and congenial, and he kept me on there, and he let us do this. Return to Zork. It basically, this and MechWarrior 2 and something called The Lost Treasure of Infocom took Activision out of Chapter 11. I think the different numbers, but I've heard like $100 million of revenue or something like that, and that's 1993. This is great. This is a whole progression here. I designed the game engine, i.e. using the same basis that did the manhole in color. The video and audio systems, there's a William Fisher's here, Bill Fisher. I'd written this, came up with this crazy compression system that could do video or image compression. I wrote it in C. People at Activision turned it to assembly. Bill took it back to C and made it faster. Thank you. It was faster in C than the assembly language. He rolled out the decompression better. It was basically a lossy compression system. And I also did the audio compression system, which is a variable ADPCM, if you know what that is. And it turns out that the audio compression system also told you how much energy was going into the audio at any given time, and you could use that to lip sync. So the floppy version lip synced by looking at the compression ratio of the audio at that moment and determining whether the mouth was moving or not. It worked really well. And Return to Zork was just my attempt to bring Infocom back. In a nutshell, Activision had ruined Infocom. They took over Infocom under Jim Levy. Bruce Davis, the next CEO, Jim was the founding CEO, felt that Infocom had overvalued its goodwill, how much it was worth. And so he sued them while they were working for Activision. So, I wanted to bring Infocom back, and I thought if I can come up with a way of doing a graphical adventure that has the deep puzzle play of the text adventure, and that was this triangle thing that did a reverse parser. In other words, so you roll over the icons, and you could use any object on any object, and you'd get like a sentence like, oh, so you want to light the hay on fire, or and the puzzles were completely unfair. I mean, the first opening of the game, you're in the canyon of the vultures, and there's a plant right in the first scene, and that plant, you want to take that plant. Well, there's two ways of doing it. We don't tell you what to do. If you take it the wrong way, 20 hours into the game, you're screwed. And that was just the beginning, I put a puzzle in there once where there was a guy yelling at you that he doesn't want the package, it's not his package, why did they send it to him? And inside is a bra. And what you had to figure out is you had to take the bra to the town, put it in the incinerator, but be very careful how you use the incinerator, because if you use it wrong, it'll blow up. Get that wire, but don't touch it, pour water on it to cool it, and then use that wire to pick a lock later on. I mean, it was literally... We literally the expression is we went hog wild on making the puzzles really hard. And it created some iconic moments. I still go to conferences, and I didn't come up with this line, but I still get to conferences, and do you know what the line here is? Want some rye? Of course you do. Yeah, so that line, people tell me that line, they buy me a drink, it's really great. It was one of the first games to have full recorded video interactions on the CD. But the floppy version was pretty close because it used a lip flap technique. And the thing is, it had innovations that were really cool, and we're going to get to the ironic part of this shortly. There was a virtual camera. You could take pictures of every scene and ask people about them. You could ask an NPC about any conversation you'd have with another NPC, because we had a virtual tape recorder, any object, any map location, or photo that you had taken. And I became, and my kids, it's like, my physics professor at Penn tells me that he brags to his grandchildren, but I became the vice president of technology at Activision, woo-woo. But why did I leave Activision in '94? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Well, one, the ironic thing is this. Remember, I had green-lighted Cyan's first title. Well, after Myst, Activision decided they didn't really want that really intricate puzzle stuff, and they wanted to do a different type of game. And the second thing, I was a little bit pig-headed. I was like pissed I didn't get a raise after helping to save the company. And then I got this offer to go to this really cool educational company called Lightspan Partnership. Lightspan was founded by John Kernan, who had done Jostens Learning Systems. And this man, I don't know how he does it, but he can raise money from anyone. He eventually raised, before the public offering, $125 million in the 90s for an educational software company selling to schools. Now, when I got there, they had raised $7 million at that time. And they hired the people who did the AT&T commercial, You Will, you know, the futuristic commercial, to do a commercial showing what Lightspan was going to be like. And what they showed was insane. It was like never going to happen. They had kids playing something like a video console, chatting with other kids, you know, controllers and all that. It was just beautiful, what do you call it, a vision film. And it got them funded. They got funded by TCI, Comcast, and Microsoft. And so I got there, and Gilman Louie, who Spectrum Holobyte, goes to me. He's on the board of advisors. Goes, Bill, don't do another offering system. Use something that's out there that you can use. So I had met the guy who did Macromedia, Mark, whatever his name is. Anyway, he had Macromedia. They had a Macromedia, had Director. Director was good. You could do everything in Director. So we started building these intricate games. Now, the head of programming, who reported to me, said, we were at a meeting, and I remember right at the very early part, and we said, you know, I know you want to use video for everything, and you want to do stuff on above video and all that, but maybe we should have it so we don't have to do that we can have a simpler stuff. No, we're going to do video. So they used something called the British Telecom Apple set-top, which was like an LC-free with an MPEG card and all that stuff. This is the era, like mid-'90s or early '90s, of the 500-channel universe, the idea that there was going to be this set-top on everyone's TV that was extremely powerful and could do everything you ever wanted to do. And they actually did a trial of this in Orlando with a Silicon graphics box, but I think the idea of having a set-top box that cost $5,000 was a little bit extreme. Didn't work out. And then the punchline is, I'm at a conference in '95 for interactive television, and the same people who were presenting there, the people who did the operating system for CDI, and I go, oh my God, not these people. We can't do this. So I was presented with the task of, Bill, the entire company depends on you, the hundreds of employees, because we had the largest animation studio in San Diego and Southern California, and we had all these people working on stuff. We had already spent $60 million on the director stuff. I mean, they went so overboard. I know if you look at YouTube, you'll find stuff bitching about Lightspan being simplistic games, but there's a series on Learning which basically used real actors and real sets and set costumes and everything else, and they used the effects team from Sliders. I mean, it was just insane because the funding had come from the cable industry. And the cable industry was convinced that this was going to be their anchor tenant. So I had to pick a platform. And the story I have about that is I was at a conference for the Sega Saturn, and I think it was Romero who turns to me and says, this is a piece of crap. You got to do the PlayStation. And I looked at FreeDO, I looked at CDI again, CDTV, CD32, and I picked the PlayStation. And then I went to a guy named Dave Warhol at a company called Real Time Associates. Bill knows him too. And he had done this awful game engine. I mean, not that it was bad in the sense that it didn't work. It was Fortran. It looked like Fortran. Go-tos, no-go subs, very primitive, but it kind of worked. And Bucky as heck. You used it, right. I hired like 8 different companies. This gets interesting. But the big problem, of course, was text. How do you make text look good on a TV set when you've been using LC-frees before? Well, I was at Aegis, and we did a title called Video Titler, and we did anti-alias fonts, and that worked. So we got good text on the PlayStation, we got good video, and away we go. We built over 100 titles using this tool called Chug, which was just a pain in the ass, but it enabled us to have people on PCs. We couldn't afford to buy, dozens and dozens of PlayStation development systems, and we didn't want people to have to learn that, so we gave them this simplistic language with simplistic commands, and they moved everything over from Director and did more, over 100 titles. Lightspan is the largest publisher in terms of number of SKUs for the PlayStation 1. And I'm here right now, and not on the coast of France in my beautiful yacht, because Lightspan went public in February of 2000, and 3 weeks later, the entire stock market collapsed. So, pivotal event of my life, probably, I'm sorry to say, changed my life in every single way. We won't get into the bitching, I'll do it later. Now for another incredible luck. So the people from PlayStation approached me, I guess around 2004, and they say, we got this idea for a game called Yo Mama, and what it's going to be is fat mothers fighting each other, and we've got the name Yo Mama somehow, whatever that meant. And I said, it's the stupidest idea in the world, but what if we did a card game basically called Yo Mama, which had Yo Mama insults of different types, and you played them against people, like a card game. I thought that was a really good idea. Well, so I'm at Comic-Con 2004, and I walk over, and there is the Topps booth. And they have this, the Dozens. It's the same effing game, exactly the same game. And it's the Wayans brothers. Now, I am actually the CEO of this company. And everyone's like going to me, oh, we're so screwed. I go, no. You're not screwed at all. We have the mobile game. Let's get them to give us the rights to do the mobile game. Those are the cards. We're going to build a mobile game. And now, I had connected with a technologist called Sherry Cuono, who was brilliant. And mobile phones in 2004, 2005 were rubbish crap, but they were very small in memory. They're very slow. But we managed to do this. We built this incredible game that had in-game chat. It had the play, and it worked on J2ME, which is the dumbest language ever done. Not that Java's bad, but J2ME, Sun should have been sued by their shareholders. They had a leading position in mobile phone technology, and they blew it. They never tested this damn thing. Every phone was different. You get two different Motorola Razors, and you have to check your code because the damn kernel would change and it would break your code. Anyway, this thing had, it's true, right? Yeah, it's true. And Brew was not that much better. I mean, but we had this thing running on J2ME and Brew, but we also had it running on WAP, and it was the same game except it didn't have the animations. We had these animations like someone walking with a microwave oven like a boombox, and all these crazy animations that go with the cards. And we built a version that would play text message only. So if you wanted to play a 4-card game, because you could play a 12-card or a 4-card game, you can see it in the first slide, you could play anyone with the 4-card game. And then finally, the coup d'etat was you would invite people by just putting in their mobile number. They get a text message, and they could just start playing the text message game, or they could have play the WAP game, the mobile web game, or they could have the game push to them and get billed on their phone bill. And you know who Trip Hawkins is, right? The guy who founded EA. Well, he had a company called Digital Chocolate, and I'm showing this to him, and he goes, Bill, right now we have a good situation. All the apps on the phones are basically curated by the carriers. All we need to do is get a game on these carrier decks, and we're made. You don't even have to be that great. And you're going to break this whole model by basically going around the carriers, and you're going to ruin everything. Trip was 100% right, as you may know, because we'll talk about what happened next. But anyway, this ran on 64 kilobyte phones. There's me, a little bit heavier. There's Sherry next to me with the Wayans. So what happened here? So every deck of cards printed had commands to get the phone. Text this and get the game on your phone. But the Wayans went a little crazy, and even though Walmart was originally going to carry the cards, Topps had done a deal with Walmart, Walmart decided that cards that were really skanky were going to prevent them from selling it. So didn't go there, and they went with Blockbuster. And also things happened at the company. I was the CEO of Bonus Mobile. What can I say without getting myself sued? I'd go to Silicon Valley, and I would say, Bonus Mobile, games that people play together. People are texting like mad on phones. Phones are meant for people to play against each other. This is the wind, and they're, oh, this is great. Kleiner Perkins, the Sell Partners, Sequoia, they love me. Never called me back. And I'm at a party in Santa Monica, and someone says, well, Bill, you're I hate to tell this, the CFO that they put into the company, well, there's a three-letter agency that's initials are SEC, and they're investigating him, and he got convicted for fraud, and not for our company, but for something else, and that's why no one would touch us. They wouldn't touch us, and when I found out that he'd also taken investment money and put it into other companies, Sherry and I had to walk out because we didn't want to wake up one day with people in suits knocking on our door. So we left that, and that was another disappointment. But let's see what happens. We started another company, initially as a ringtone portal, and we're doing games, and we have a flash game called Free Paris Hilton that we use as a promotional tool, but the iPhone is coming up. And all we know about the iPhone is that it doesn't have apps yet, it has web. And we need to come up with a game concept to do an iPhone game. And I see this from Bomber, and I say, oh, you are so wrong. So I come up with the idea for the first game, and it gets programmed before the iPhone comes out. When the iPhone comes out, we call up someone that we know who has the phone in Oregon, and he tests it, and we get it out. And so, yes, I did the concept for the very first iPhone game, iWhack, a web-based game where you tap on Bomber. I wasted days trying to get sound to work on that damn 4.0 HTML, but it did play, and it was fun, and Apple loved us for a long time. So I became the CEO of MyNumo, and we started doing games for the iPhone like Pigs A-Poppin', which was basically a nuclear chain reaction game, but instead of having nuclei cause new nuclei to split, you overfed pigs, and when they got too fat, they exploded, and other pigs would grow. So that's, and this was exploding pigs before Angry Birds. So then I did a bunch of games for MyNumo. Designs. Now, the one on the left was an interesting story. It was called Stick Figure Movie Trivia, and the reason it happened is because Sherry had come up with a game called What's the Butt? And What's the Butt was based on a iVillage thing we saw where they were asking you to identify celebrities from behind. So we had done a deal, gotten permission, got all these pictures of celebrities from behind, dressed, not undressed, and we did a game called What's the Butt? And Apple told us and Google told us to drop dead. And so we had to find something else to do. And I came with this idea of doing a game where you identify movies from stick figures. There's a word carnival with the letters. The lesson with word carnival is don't believe the trends. Right then and there, when we did word carnival, which was find the word and then the letters would pop and new balloons would float up, was draw something, the draw something game where you draw, and we thought we had to be multiplayer. That was a big mistake. And all that. So yeah, we did Play Screen. Play Screen evolved to be more of a casino company, and that legacy follows me out. But in 2018, I took a job working for a company doing hardware for some reason, and I decided I wanted to write a game, and my brother's a climatologist, my wife is ex-EPA, and I wrote this, The Climate Trail. This was an ode to the Oregon Trail, but used a visual novel engine in Python to build a game that was basically helping you have these party of climate refugees going from Atlanta to Canada. And these things come up and you have various supplies, you find supplies, you meet other people, you decide what to do with them. It had to be school friendly, so there's no cannibals, there's no like the postman, people running around shooting you, which is probably what would happen in this real circumstance. But it basically anticipated a climate catastrophe, gets worse and all that. And the sad thing is, it anticipated this. As I said, my brother is a climatologist, and I said, what happens when we get to this much warming? He goes, well, you'll have extreme weather and, fires will be worse. And of course, the people who worked with me at Aegis is their parents built a house in Pacific Palisades in '65, and they lost the house and all that. Okay, what's happening as of late? Oh, I'm really on time. I took that old game, Stick Figure Movie Trivia, and I reimagined it, and I borrowed. The real word is stolen, the whole idea of Jack Attack. One of the things that killed Stick Figure Movie Trivia is you only had, a certain number of letters, you could spell the name out. So Shawshank became Shawshank. It was a stupid interface. And the second thing is, my wife, who is not a gamer, loves Ruzzle. And I realized the reason she liked Ruzzle is the time pressure. The time pressure of having to come up with words fast. So I figured, what if I took the Jack Attack and had so you just tap when the right answer comes, and I could build a real-time one-tap trivia game. And I did. And it's out. It's called Stick Figure Movie Trivia on the 2 app stores, and also stickfiguremovietrivia.com. The only thing that was crazy, driving me freaking nuts on this, is I negotiated a deal with one of the largest movie review sites to have it hosted there and share revenue. And they unfortunately hired the wrong group of people to update their website. So they've been literally 5 months, 6 months behind. So if anyone knows it's not the companies I'm about to say, but if you know, anyone here knows IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes, Screen Rant, or Netflix, please let me know, because I need to get to those people. I'm messaging them. And that's basically the story. I have a whole bunch of games I want to do based on this engine, like what's the state, what kind of dog is this, you know, and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I'm still in the game business. My main job is I'm the CEO of a casino startup, because once again, having that background means something. And I will say this, the online casino world is the only game segment I know where the older you are, the more valuable you are. The regular game industry could give a hoot. I once interviewed for a job to run a studio in Seattle. At the time, that was literally 15 years ago, 14 years ago, and they made me an offer and had us move and find a place, and they took the offer away. And I found out it was because I was more senior than anyone there, and the people who were working there were scared of having me come in. It's a stupid story. But yeah, so that's why I'm still doing casino stuff and get to go around the world and present on it. But you know, it's been a tough 2 years, let's put it that way. I did direct Shiba Eternity for the SHIB people. It was not a blockchain game. It was strictly a competitor to Hearthstone. But it pissed off Wikipedia so much they took me off Wikipedia. I just don't get it, but that's the way it is. So we have time for a little bit of questions. I should tell the best Activision story before I cut out. So in 1989, the producer goes to the comic show in New York, sees a new comic, likes it. Activision at the time ran focus groups with teenage boys, you know, pizza and soda, showed the concept to these teenage boys, and the result was teenage boys show little interest in anthropomorphic turtles. They had the deal for $20,000. They could have had all worldwide rights, video game rights to Ninja Turtles for $20,000. They turned it down. That's my Lackovision story. Wow, good story. Yeah, thank you. Any questions or insults? No.